It was just another ordinary day for 14-year-old Maya as she walked into the local department store. She had a few things on her mind: a new book she wanted to pick up, some snacks for later, and maybe a new pair of shoes if she found something she liked. The bustling store was filled with the usual mix of shoppers, some hurrying through their tasks, others leisurely browsing the aisles. Maya didn't think much of it as she picked up a few items and made her way down one of the busy aisles. What happened next would change her day, and maybe even her life, forever. Maya had been minding her business, like any teenager, when she suddenly felt the piercing gaze of a woman staring directly at her. It wasn't just any stare, it was one of those looks that made you feel uncomfortable, judged. The woman, who was standing nearby, looked at Maya with a disapproving expression, arms crossed in front of her chest. Maya shrugged it off at first, assuming maybe the woman was just having a bad day or perhaps had mistaken her for someone else. But as she continued to walk, the woman's stare never wavered. Then, out of nowhere, the woman's voice cut through the hum of the store like a sharp knife. "Excuse me," she said, her tone demanding, "you need to leave. Now." Maya froze, caught off guard. The woman's words felt heavy, like they carried an accusation, but Maya couldn't understand why. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't breaking any rules. Why did this woman feel the need to ask her to leave? Taken aback, Maya took a step back and tried to explain. "I don't understand." "What do you mean?" she asked, genuinely confused, her voice trembling just slightly from the sudden tension. The woman, however, didn't soften. Instead, her tone grew more insistent, her eyes narrowing. "I said you need to leave. You don't belong here." Maya's heart started to race. There were no signs posted, no security asking anyone to leave, no reason for this woman to single her out like this. As much as she wanted to argue back, something inside told her not to escalate the situation. She wasn't sure what to do next. Was this some kind of misunderstanding? Or was this something deeper? The way the woman was speaking made Maya feel like she was being targeted for something that had nothing to do with what she was doing in the store. Before she could respond, the woman took a few steps forward, blocking her path. The tension in the air was palpable now. Maya felt every eye in the store shifting toward them, some curious, some judgmental, as if they, too, could sense that something wasn't right. And then, just as things seemed to be reaching a breaking point, a deep, authoritative voice boomed from behind them. "Is there a problem here?" Maya's heart skipped a beat as she turned to see who had spoken. The crowd parted slightly, revealing a tall, well-dressed man with an air of confidence and power. He moved with purpose, his sharp suit and the way he carried himself making it clear that he was someone important, someone who was not to be ignored. The woman who had been confronting Maya immediately straightened up, her face changing from one of stern anger to one of sudden unease. The tension in the air shifted again, but this time, it wasn't just a quiet unease, it was an overwhelming sense of discomfort. Maya recognized the man now. This wasn't just any stranger, this was her dad. And not just any dad. He was the CEO of one of the most successful tech companies in the country. The woman, realizing who had appeared, hesitated, her mouth hanging open as if she were searching for the right words to explain herself. She stammered, I didn't know. I thought she was." Maya's dad, standing tall with a calm but unyielding expression, looked directly at her. "What exactly do you think she was doing wrong?" The woman's face flushed with embarrassment, her words failing her as she stuttered, unable to provide a reasonable explanation for her actions. The store had gone completely silent now, the other shoppers watching, wondering how this confrontation would play out. Maya stood there, feeling a mix of relief and confusion. She had no idea what had just happened or why her father's presence had so quickly turned the situation around. But what she did know was that something much deeper was at play here, a moment that revealed how prejudice could manifest in the most unexpected ways. As the woman struggled to explain herself, Maya's dad turned to his daughter, his expression softening. "Maya, are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Maya nodded, still processing everything, but she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she looked at him. Her dad had a presence that commanded respect, not just because of his wealth or status, but because he was someone who stood up for what was right, no matter the situation. The woman finally stammered, her voice weak and uncertain. I didn't mean. I thought she was. I'm sorry." But her apology was hollow. Maya could see right through it. It wasn't the apology that mattered, it was the fact that the woman had acted on an assumption, a prejudice that Maya hadn't even known was there. And now, with her father's arrival, the woman was exposed for what she truly was, someone who believed she had the right to decide who belonged and who didn't, based on nothing more than the color of their skin. As the woman turned and walked away, Maya couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of injustice. She didn't know if she would ever get an explanation from the woman, or if this moment would just become another one of those uncomfortable memories that stayed with her. But what Maya did know was that her dad's presence had shifted the dynamics in the store, forcing the woman to confront the reality of her own actions. But just as the situation began to settle, something unexpected happened. The store manager, who had been watching the entire exchange from the sidelines, approached with a clipboard in hand. His expression was unreadable, but there was a hint of something behind his eyes, something Maya couldn't quite place. Her dad turned to face him, his brow furrowing slightly. "Is there a problem, too?" The manager hesitated before answering. "Well, sir, I just need to confirm that your daughter wasn't causing any trouble here. We've had a few complaints." Before the manager could finish his sentence, Maya's dad spoke again, his voice sharp and clear. "Complaints about what exactly?" "My daughter hasn't done anything wrong." The air around them seemed to grow heavier again, as if the entire store was holding its breath. And as the manager opened his mouth to speak, Maya found herself wondering, was this really over, or was something more about to unfold? The store manager hesitated for a long moment, as if considering how best to phrase his next words. Maya could sense the shift in his posture, the uncertainty creeping into his demeanor. He glanced at the other shoppers, most of whom had now gathered in quiet clusters, eyes glued to the confrontation unfolding in front of them. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Maya felt her stomach twist in knots. What was going on? Why was everyone suddenly acting so strange? The manager finally cleared his throat. His gaze now fixed firmly on Maya's dad. "We've had a few complaints, sir. It's about your daughter, and some of the other customers. They've said there's been a misunderstanding." A sharp silence followed his words. Maya felt her heart beat faster, the weight of the situation bearing down on her more heavily than before. Was this some kind of setup? How could there be complaints about her when she had done nothing wrong? Maya opened her mouth to speak, to ask what exactly was going on, but her dad raised a hand, signaling her to stay quiet for the moment. The store manager shifted his weight uncomfortably. "It's just that, well, there have been instances in the past where a few shoppers felt uncomfortable around some of the younger customers. People have started to assume things." Maya blinked, trying to process what he was saying. What did he mean by assume things? Her mind raced through possible scenarios, each more confusing than the last. Was he saying that people had been complaining about her just because of her age? Or because of something else? There had to be more to this than met the eye. Her dad, however, seemed unfazed by the manager's vague explanation. He stood tall, his piercing gaze locked on the man in front of him. "I'm not sure I understand what you're saying," he said calmly, though there was a clear edge of authority in his voice. "My daughter is here to shop like everyone else. She's done nothing wrong. So why don't you tell me exactly what these complaints are about, and why it seems like we're being singled out?" Maya's heart skipped a beat as she realized what might be happening. Was this more than just a misunderstanding? Was her dad being challenged here because of who he was, or perhaps because of who she was? Maya had heard whispers before, the kind of conversations that people didn't think she could hear, about the way some people viewed her dad's success. There were always murmurs about how some of his wealthier colleagues and rivals might harbor resentment, and how the world sometimes judged people by the color of their skin, even when it wasn't supposed to. Her dad wasn't just any businessman. He had built his company from the ground up, starting with nothing but an idea and a vision. Over the years, he had become a well-known figure in the corporate world. But his success came with a price. Maya's family had faced more than their fair share of challenges, more than just the usual struggles of wealth and fame. There were always whispers, always people who wanted to undermine them. People who couldn't fathom how a black man had managed to achieve such success. Maya had seen the stares, the sideways glances, and the subtle challenges her dad had faced in the corporate world. But this was different. This wasn't about business deals or corporate rivalries. This was personal. Someone, somewhere, had decided that Maya, just a teenager, shopping in a store like any other, was somehow out of place. As her dad took a step forward, his expression hardening, Maya felt a wave of mixed emotions. She had always admired how he carried himself, how he could walk into any room and command respect without saying a word. But now, as she looked at him, there was something in his eyes that she had never seen before. A glimmer of something dangerous. Protective, yes, but also a deep frustration that this moment had even happened. She knew he was probably wondering the same thing she was. Why did this woman target me? Why did she think she could tell my daughter to leave? The manager cleared his throat again, looking distinctly uncomfortable under her father's gaze. I'm not sure if it's an issue of race," he stammered, "but there have been complaints about young people causing a scene. It's been happening more and more lately. We try to be understanding, of course, but we have to maintain a certain atmosphere in the store." Her dad didn't flinch. "I don't care about maintaining an atmosphere. I care about my daughter's safety and dignity. If you or anyone else in this store feels the need to make assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't, then that's a much bigger problem than you realize." Maya's breath caught in her throat. It was clear now that something far more insidious was going on here. Was it possible that this wasn't just an isolated incident? Could this store, this community, have more people thinking like the woman who had confronted her? The idea made her blood run cold. "I'm sure the complaints weren't meant to be taken personally," the manager muttered, as if he were trying to deflect the growing tension. "It's just that we've had issues with," but her dad didn't let him finish. "With what?" he snapped. "Issues with people who don't look like you? Issues with people who don't fit into whatever box you've decided for your store? You need to stop talking in circles and give me a straight answer." For a long moment, the manager stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The room felt like it was holding its breath, and the silence between them grew heavier with each passing second. Maya stood there, caught in the middle of it all, her mind racing. Was this the way things would always be for her? Would she always have to face the judgment of others, even when she hadn't done a thing to deserve it? She didn't know what the future held, but this moment, this experience, had already shaped something in her. A fire had been lit inside her, and she wasn't sure if it would ever go out. Just as it seemed the situation would spiral into something more heated, another figure appeared at the edge of the store. It was another woman, this one older, wearing a suit with a clipboard in her hand. She walked briskly toward the group, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Maya's dad turned toward her, clearly recognizing the new arrival. "What's going on here?" the woman asked, her tone professional but firm. She was a bit older than the store manager and carried herself with a certain confidence that suggested she held some kind of authority in this place. The manager visibly relaxed, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "There have been some complaints, but I've got it under control," he said quickly, though the discomfort was still evident in his voice. The woman turned to Maya's dad, her gaze calculating. "I'm sorry for the trouble, sir. I just wanted to make sure we resolve this quickly. If there's been any confusion or discomfort, we'll make it right." But Maya didn't trust her words. She could feel the underlying tension in the air, the way everyone seemed to be trying to smooth things over without addressing the deeper issue. Something was happening here, and Maya wasn't about to let it slip away without understanding what it truly meant. Her dad's next words would determine everything. What would he do now? Would he walk away, knowing there was a bigger problem at play, or would he dig deeper, unearth the truth, and confront it head-on? As the seconds dragged on, Maya could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The mystery of what had happened in the store was only growing, and the answers seemed to be just out of reach. The woman in the suit, who had just arrived, surveyed the situation carefully. Her eyes flicking between Maya, her dad, and the manager. There was a coldness in her expression, the kind of look you get when you're used to being in control, used to making decisions without ever having to explain yourself. She didn't look at Maya with any sense of empathy, as if the teenager standing there in the middle of the storm was just another problem to be managed. Maya felt her stomach churn. There was something off about this woman, something that sent a chill down her spine. She wasn't sure if it was the way she held herself, or the way the manager seemed to almost lean on her for reassurance. Either way, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was being dismissed, like she didn't even have a voice in her own story. Her dad, however, was no longer waiting for an explanation. He was taking matters into his own hands. His voice, calm but firm, rang through the air. "I don't think we're going to resolve this by pretending like nothing happened," he said, his eyes now locking with the woman's. "I want to know why my daughter was targeted like this. I want to understand what's really going on here." The woman paused, clearly caught off guard by the intensity in his voice. For a moment, she looked as if she might speak, but then she seemed to reconsider. Her posture shifted slightly, and Maya noticed the faintest flicker of something, maybe guilt, maybe discomfort, pass across her face before it was quickly replaced with a practiced neutrality. "I assure you, sir, there's no reason to get upset," the woman said, her voice smooth and almost too rehearsed. "We're just following store policy. As you know, retail environments can sometimes experience misunderstandings, and it's our responsibility to ensure the safety and comfort of all our customers." Maya's dad didn't budge. Safety and comfort? His voice was rising now, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You want to talk about safety and comfort when you've just humiliated my daughter in front of an entire store for no reason? This is more than just a misunderstanding, and I think we both know that." Maya's mind was spinning. She was struggling to keep up, to process everything happening in real time. What was this store trying to cover up? Was it really about a misunderstanding, or was there something more to this? The idea that someone would go out of their way to cause trouble for her, and that it might have been connected to her race or her father's success, was too unsettling to ignore. She could see how her dad was getting frustrated, but what could they even do in a situation like this? There had to be more beneath the surface. The manager shifted uneasily, his eyes darting around as if he was trying to find the words to smooth things over. He wasn't prepared for the confrontation. It was clear that his role here wasn't to resolve anything, but to simply keep the peace. But peace didn't seem possible anymore, not when there were so many unanswered questions hanging in the air. Maya felt the weight of all the eyes in the store pressing down on her. Some customers were pretending not to watch, but she could feel their curiosity, their judgment. They were all witnessing something they didn't fully understand, and she was the one caught in the middle of it. It made her want to shrink into herself, to disappear into the background, to avoid the feeling of being singled out like this. But at the same time, a flicker of anger surged through her. She wasn't going to let this happen. Not again. Her dad looked over at her, his eyes softening for just a moment before he turned back to the woman. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone steady but sharp. The woman hesitated. "It's Veronica." Her answer was quick, too quick, and Maya couldn't help but notice the way her voice had faltered, just for an instant. "Well, Veronica," Maya's dad continued, his words deliberate, "I think it's time you tell me exactly what's going on here. Because if you think you can hide behind store policy and avoid the truth, you're wrong." Veronica's expression remained unchanged, but the tension in the air thickened. Maya felt a strange mix of awe and fear as her dad stood his ground. It wasn't just his presence that commanded respect, it was the certainty in his words, the fact that he knew this wasn't just an ordinary situation. He was pushing, not just for an answer, but for a resolution to something that had gone on too long. Maya's heart pounded. She was watching him, seeing how he operated, how he fought for what was right, no matter what. But in the pit of her stomach, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Whatever was happening here wasn't just a random act. It felt like a pattern, like something that had been brewing beneath the surface for a long time. Suddenly, another voice interrupted the standoff. "I think we need to take this into the back office," the store manager said, his voice tight. "We don't want to escalate things any further here. We can sort this out privately." Maya's dad shook his head. "No. We're not going anywhere. If you want to resolve this, you'll do it here, where everyone can see what's happening." The tension in the store was palpable. Shoppers were whispering, exchanging confused glances, but no one dared to step forward, to speak up. They were all trapped in the same silence, unsure of what to do, unsure of what to believe. But Maya wasn't going to wait around for things to blow over. She had to know more. Something wasn't adding up, and she could feel it in her bones. As Veronica and the manager exchanged uneasy glances, Maya's eyes swept across the store. She noticed a few people who had been watching them intently, a couple of older women standing near the front, a man in a leather jacket who had been eyeing the whole scene from the back of the aisle. Maya's instincts told her they knew something. Maybe they had seen things unfold before, maybe they had heard whispers. Whatever it was, they were on edge, just like her. "Are we done with the games?" Maya's dad's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "I want answers, now." The silence that followed was deafening. And as Maya looked at the people around her, she realized that, for the first time, she wasn't just a bystander in this story. She was a part of it. This wasn't just about her dad. This wasn't just about her. This was about something much bigger, something that ran deeper than anyone cared to admit. And in that moment, Maya knew that the truth, whatever it was, wasn't going to be easy to find. The tension in the air seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Maya could feel her pulse racing as the silence in the store seemed to stretch on forever. Her dad's voice had cut through the air, sharp and commanding, but now everything hung in the balance. It felt like the whole store was holding its breath, waiting for someone to make the next move, to say the words that would shift everything. Veronica and the manager exchanged another glance, and for a moment, it was as if they were silently deciding what to do next. The manager was visibly sweating now, shifting from foot to foot, his discomfort palpable. Veronica, on the other hand, maintained her calm exterior, though there was something in her eyes, something almost defensive, as if she was trying to protect herself from whatever storm was brewing. Maya's dad didn't budge. He stood firm, his gaze unwavering, but Maya could see the flicker of something behind his eyes. His calm demeanor was cracking, revealing the frustration and anger that had been building ever since he had walked into the store. He wasn't going to let this go. Maya knew that, and she knew that, whatever happened next, things were about to escalate in ways they couldn't predict. "Are you going to tell me or not?" her dad asked again, his voice more forceful now. His patience had worn thin, and the store manager took an instinctive step back, as if bracing for what might come next. "Look, sir," the manager began, but his voice was shaky. We're just trying to keep things under control. We've had some complaints. It's not personal." "It's just not personal?" Maya's dad interrupted. "You want to talk to me about not making it personal when you've just tried to throw my daughter out of this store for no reason?" His voice was rising now, commanding attention, and the murmurs around them grew louder. Customers were starting to gather, their curiosity and unease mounting with every passing second. Maya felt a knot tighten in her stomach as the scene began to unfold, the tension building to an unbearable point. She could hear whispers from the onlookers, bits of gossip about her dad's company, about how successful he was, how much influence he had. But there were also whispers about the woman who had first confronted her, about how she had been acting suspiciously towards other customers in the past. Maya couldn't make sense of it all, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just a random encounter. Something was happening here that went far beyond a simple misunderstanding. Her dad's eyes narrowed as he fixed his gaze on Veronica. "I don't care about your complaints," he said, his voice steady but full of an underlying fury. "I care about the truth. And I'm not leaving until I have it." Veronica didn't flinch. "I'm just doing my job," she said, her voice tight now, betraying the cracks in her previously calm demeanor. "You can make this difficult, but we can handle it. We've handled worse." Maya watched closely, trying to read the situation, trying to understand the dynamics playing out before her. There was something about Veronica's words that didn't sit right. "We've handled worse." What exactly did that mean? Had there been incidents before? Was this something the store had dealt with time and time again? Why did it feel like they were hiding something? Maya's dad took a step closer, his voice lowering but with a dangerous edge. "If you think I'm going to let you intimidate my daughter, you've got another thing coming. I know exactly how these things work, Veronica. This isn't the first time I've seen people like you cover up their mistakes." Veronica's expression shifted, her eyes flashing with irritation, but she didn't back down. Instead, she seemed to gather herself, pulling her shoulders back. "We have a policy here," she said, her tone colder now, "and I'm just following it." "But you're not following anything but your own assumptions." Maya's dad fired back, his anger now palpable. "My daughter was doing nothing wrong, and you just assumed something based on, what? The color of her skin? Her age? What?" A thick silence fell over the group. Maya felt like she could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She had no idea what was coming next, but she knew one thing for sure: this was the breaking point. Her dad wasn't going to back down. He never had before. For a moment, Maya looked around at the crowd. A few people had stopped whispering and were now watching more intently. Some of them were still pretending not to notice, but there was no hiding the tension in the air. Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen. The store was about to become a battleground for something bigger than just this encounter. She could feel it. Then, out of nowhere, a voice came from the back of the store. It was low, almost a whisper, but it cut through the air like a sharp knife. "This is not how things should be handled." Maya's dad whipped around, his eyes scanning the store, his guard up. From the back of the store, a man in a well-tailored suit stepped forward, his presence almost as commanding as her father's. The crowd parted as he approached, and Maya felt her stomach lurch. The man was familiar, she recognized him now. He was one of her dad's colleagues, someone who had been at his company for years. The man's name was Victor, Maya had met him at several business events. He was quiet, reserved, but well respected in the industry. Victor's eyes locked onto Maya's dad, and for a moment, it was clear that he was caught between two worlds. He wasn't just a colleague of her father's, he was also a figure who had been deeply involved in corporate circles where race and power played subtle, dangerous games. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Victor continued, his voice calm but with an unmistakable edge of authority. "We all know how delicate these situations can be." Maya could see her dad's eyes narrow. He didn't trust Victor, there was no mistaking that. It wasn't just the man's words, it was the way he'd arrived at just the right moment, like he'd been watching from the sidelines, waiting for the situation to spiral. "What are you doing here, Victor?" her dad asked, his voice low and dangerous. "What's your stake in this?" Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced over at Veronica, then back at her dad. "I think we need to resolve this calmly," he said, the words clipped and calculated. "Let's not escalate things further." Maya felt a surge of suspicion rise in her chest. Why was Victor stepping in now? What did he know that they didn't? The crowd around them had grown larger, their whispers growing louder, and the tension in the air had reached a boiling point. Maya could almost taste the unease, the uncertainty that hung like a storm cloud waiting to break. She wanted to shout, to demand answers, but she knew the moment wasn't hers to control. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everything that had been building up for months, maybe even years, under the surface. This moment was going to change everything. But how? And who was going to walk away from it unscathed? The words hung in the air, unresolved. The silence in the store was deafening. Maya's heart raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The arrival of Victor, the unexpected tension in the air, and her dad's hardened stance, everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. She could see the subtle shift in her father's demeanor, his patience worn thin, his mind working overtime to piece together what was really going on here. Something didn't sit right about Victor's sudden appearance, and Maya knew in her gut that this wasn't just some random intervention. There was something deeper at play. Victor took a step closer to Maya's dad, his face impassive. "I think you're both overreacting," he said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "This could have been handled without making a scene. All I'm asking is that we handle this like professionals." But her dad wasn't buying it. His gaze never left Victor's face, hardening further. "I don't need a lecture from you, Victor. I need to understand why my daughter was targeted in the first place. And I need you to stop pretending like you didn't know exactly what was going on." Victor's eyes flicked toward Veronica, his lips tightening ever so slightly. The briefest of exchanges passed between them, but Maya caught it, the subtle communication, the look that confirmed her worst suspicion. It wasn't just about her and her dad. They were part of something bigger, something orchestrated behind the scenes. The store, the complaints, the strange behavior, it was all connected. But how? As if on cue, another figure emerged from the back of the store. This time, it wasn't a familiar face, but someone who immediately drew attention. The woman who had been standing near the entrance, the one who had been observing the confrontation from the sidelines, took a step forward. She wasn't dressed like the typical shopper. She wore a sharp business suit, her hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, her eyes calculating. Her presence felt almost deliberate, as if she were stepping in just when things were about to get too out of hand. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't noticed the woman before, but now, as she made her way toward the scene, there was no ignoring her. She walked with purpose, her gaze focused on Maya's dad, and the air in the store shifted once more. "I think this has gone on long enough," the woman said, her voice smooth but with an undeniable edge. "If there's any further discussion, it should be handled in private. There's no need for this kind of spectacle." Maya's dad looked at her, clearly surprised. "And who exactly are you?" he asked, his voice cold and sharp. His protective instincts were on high alert now, sensing that this was no ordinary shopper, no random passerby. There was something more here, something he hadn't been expecting. The woman smiled, a thin, almost forced smile. "I'm with the store's corporate team. My name is Emma. And I've been following the situation closely." Maya felt her stomach twist. Corporate team? The words didn't sit well with her. There was something about Emma that radiated power, something that made Maya uneasy. She wasn't just a bystander, she had a purpose, and it was clear that purpose had everything to do with shutting down this confrontation before it could escalate further. "So, what is this really about, then?" her dad asked, his voice tight. "Who exactly do you represent?" Emma's gaze didn't waver. "I represent the interests of this store, and I've been instructed to ensure this matter is resolved quietly. There's no reason for this to escalate into something that could hurt both your reputation and the store's." Maya's head spun. There was a new layer to this, one that was starting to make her skin crawl. Corporate interests? Who was pulling the strings here? Why were they so desperate to silence the truth? Before anyone could respond, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "Is this how you treat all your customers?" It was the same voice from earlier, the one who had been whispering in the background, the one who Maya had noticed observing the situation closely. A woman who had been watching quietly from the corner, her arms crossed. She was stepping forward now, her expression a mixture of disbelief and outrage. Maya's pulse quickened. The woman wasn't just an observer, she was angry, and her words were loaded with something that felt personal. Something about the way she looked at the scene, the way her eyes darted between Maya's dad, the store employees, and the crowd, suggested she knew more than she was letting on. "You've already made your assumptions about my daughter and tried to throw her out," the woman continued, her voice rising. "But what about the rest of us? What about all the people you've ignored? What about the ones you've mistreated for years?" Maya's dad stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he took in the woman's words. "What are you talking about?" The woman didn't flinch. "I've been a customer here for a long time. And I've seen this happen before. Not to me, but to others. The way you treat people who don't fit the ideal customer image, people of color, people who don't belong in your exclusive space. You think you can sweep it all under the rug, but you can't. This is bigger than your little store policies." The words hit Maya like a punch to the gut. It was like the veil had been pulled back, revealing a truth that had been hiding in plain sight. The store wasn't just about bad customer service or a few complaints, it was about something deeper, something insidious, something systemic. The whispers that had been circulating in the back of her mind about race and privilege, about how people like her and her dad were viewed in spaces they didn't belong, it was all coming to light in this one explosive moment. Her dad's jaw tightened as he turned to face the woman. "Are you saying this store has a history of discrimination?" His voice was a low growl, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. The woman didn't hesitate. "I'm saying this store is a microcosm of a larger problem. A problem that goes beyond just a few isolated incidents. I'm talking about a pattern, a culture of exclusion. And it's about time someone put a stop to it." The tension in the store skyrocketed. The murmurs grew louder, the onlookers unsure of what to make of the confrontation now unfolding before them. People who had been quietly watching, silently absorbing the drama, were starting to pick sides. Some seemed shocked, others looked uncomfortable. But the crowd was no longer indifferent, they were involved now, pulled into the story in ways they hadn't expected. Maya felt her hands shaking. The stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just about one store or one incident. This was about something far bigger, something that would echo far beyond these walls. And as the truth began to unfurl, Maya realized with a sinking feeling that everything she thought she understood about the situation had been just the surface. There was so much more at play here, and it was only just beginning to come into focus. But what would happen next? Would the store's corporate team silence them all? Would her dad back down, or would he finally get the answers they needed? Would the woman who had spoken up have the courage to see this through? Everything was on the edge, teetering between confrontation and resolution. And Maya knew that whatever came next would change everything. The final pieces of the puzzle were about to fall into place, but not in the way anyone was expecting. The room was charged with an electric tension, the weight of everyone's words and actions pressing down on the moment. Maya's heart was pounding in her chest, the truth now out in the open. The woman who had stepped forward, the one who had spoken out about the store's history of discrimination, wasn't backing down. And neither was her dad. He stood there, firm and resolute, staring at the crowd and at Victor, Emma, and Veronica, his anger giving way to something deeper, something determined. "I've had enough of the silence," her dad said, his voice rising with conviction. "You can try to cover this up all you want, but the truth is out now. And you're not going to keep us from exposing it." Victor shifted uncomfortably, but Emma remained cool, her composure never faltering. Veronica, however, was visibly sweating, her face flushed as she tried to gather her thoughts. The woman who had spoken out earlier stood tall beside Maya's dad now, her eyes blazing with the same fury. It was clear she wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug. "You think you can control the narrative," the woman said, her voice steady, but brimming with an unspoken power. "You think you can push people like us around and hide behind your policies, but you're wrong. This isn't just about Maya or her dad. This is about the countless others who've been mistreated in silence. This is about accountability." Maya could feel the storm building, the reality of what was happening settling in. She had been caught up in something much bigger than a simple misunderstanding. It wasn't just her that had been wronged, this was a systemic problem that was finally being dragged into the light. Maya's hands clenched into fists at her sides, the weight of it all sinking in. This wasn't a battle she had ever expected to fight, but now that she was in it, there was no turning back. Emma glanced at Victor, then back at the crowd, a subtle shift in her demeanor. But then, something unexpected happened. The doors to the store opened with a loud jingle, and a man stepped inside, someone Maya hadn't seen before. He was tall, his presence commanding, but what really caught her attention was the look on his face. He wasn't dressed like a customer, his clothes were sharp, businesslike, but there was an unmistakable familiarity in his eyes. And as soon as he entered, he made a beeline for the scene. It was her father. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she stared at the man walking toward them. He looked almost identical to her dad, but older, with a presence that exuded authority in ways that were hard to ignore. He had the same sharp features, the same intensity in his eyes, but there was no mistaking the difference. This wasn't just anyone. This was her dad's older brother, Andrew. The one Maya had heard about in passing but had never met. Her uncle. Maya's jaw dropped as she realized the situation was about to take an unexpected turn. Andrew wasn't just any businessman, he was someone with connections, someone with clout in a way her dad hadn't mentioned before. And as he walked toward them, Maya could see the recognition in Emma and Victor's eyes. They knew who he was. And they clearly weren't expecting him to be here. Andrew didn't even look at the crowd as he made his way to the front. His eyes locked on Victor first, then Emma, then Veronica. He stopped just in front of them, his presence overwhelming in a way that made even the tension-filled room feel small. "Is this what's going on?" Andrew's voice was deep, authoritative, and it cut through the noise like a blade. "I come in here, and I find my nephew and brother caught in the middle of a public spectacle over nothing? Over your incompetence?" Victor took a step back, his face draining of color. Emma's lips tightened, but there was no denying the discomfort that washed over her. Veronica looked visibly rattled, glancing from Andrew to the others, unsure of how to react. Maya's dad stood still, but there was a shift in his demeanor. This was his brother, his older brother, the one who had kept his distance but had always been involved in the background, always watching over things in ways Maya never realized until now. "This is a bigger issue than you think, Andrew," Emma said, trying to regain some control. "We're just following company policy." "Policy?" Andrew's voice was low, dangerous. "Don't tell me about policy. I've spent my entire career fighting against policies that hurt people like Maya. If you think you can cover up your mistakes with more corporate jargon, you've got another thing coming." Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. Her uncle was speaking out now, fighting for them, for her, in a way her father hadn't even expected. The tension that had built up over the past few minutes was reaching its boiling point. And Maya couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Her family, her dad, her uncle, had been in the same room for a long time, each one seemingly unaware of the other's true role in this unfolding drama. "I think you need to leave," Andrew continued, his gaze now fixed on Emma and Veronica. "Before you make things worse. I won't let you ruin my family's reputation over some petty corporate agenda. Not on my watch." The store was now silent, everyone watching as Emma and Veronica hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Finally, Emma's face hardened, but there was something else in her expression, something that told Maya the game was up. "This isn't over," she said, her voice quiet but dangerous. "You can't just walk in here and act like you own the place." Andrew didn't flinch. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers," he said simply. "And I suggest you reconsider how you treat people in the future." With that, he turned and walked towards the exit, leaving the store in stunned silence. Victor followed, his face a mask of frustration and defeat. Veronica lingered for a moment, then hurried to catch up, the tension between them palpable. Maya stood frozen, taking in the scene. Her heart was still racing, but now, she wasn't sure if it was relief or something else that was flooding through her. Her dad looked over at her, his face unreadable, but there was a flicker of pride in his eyes as he watched her uncle leave the store. "You didn't tell me about Andrew," Maya said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. Her dad sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't want you to have to deal with that side of the family. But I'm glad he stepped in." Maya didn't know what to say. Her mind was still trying to process everything that had just happened. Her uncle, her estranged uncle, had just made sure they didn't walk away from this with their heads down. He had fought for them, even when Maya didn't know she needed it. As they walked toward the exit, Maya looked back one last time. The store was quieter now, the tension diffused, but the questions remained. What was truly happening behind closed doors? What did this mean for the future? She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain, her family had just set a new course, one that wasn't defined by silence or complacency. But as they stepped outside, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. She had learned the hard way that when things like this happen, they don't always end neatly. There was a world out there, one much bigger than this store, that was still hiding secrets, and Maya wasn't sure if she was ready to uncover them all. But one thing was clear, she wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. As they walked out of the store, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that things were only just beginning to settle. Her Uncle Andrew's sudden intervention had shifted the entire dynamic, but she knew that the moment's resolution was only temporary. The tension in the store had evaporated, but the underlying issues of racism, power, and exclusion, were still there, lingering in the background. This wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Her dad, walking alongside her, glanced down at her with a look of quiet pride. He hadn't said much since Andrew had arrived, But Maya could tell that the appearance of her uncle, someone who had always been a shadow in the family, had been a game changer. Her dad had a lot of respect for him, and the fact that he had stepped in when it mattered made Maya feel both relieved and more confused than ever. She had no idea how much influence Andrew truly had in their lives or how much he was willing to wield it, but she knew one thing for sure: this wouldn't be the last time they crossed paths. "Are you okay?" her dad asked as they reached the car. His voice was soft, full of concern. Maya hesitated for a moment, processing everything that had happened. "I think so. It feels like there's so much more to all of this. It wasn't just about me, was it?" Her eyes drifted to the horizon, the weight of the events pressing down on her. Her dad sighed, leaning against the car as he glanced over at her. "No, it wasn't. And that's something I should have prepared you for. This wasn't just some isolated incident. What happened in there, it's a part of something much bigger." Maya frowned, trying to piece everything together. "But why did we get caught up in it? Why did Veronica pick me out like that? Why did it feel like everyone was against me?" Her dad pushed himself off the car and stood beside her. "I think Veronica's actions were just a symptom of a bigger issue at play. She was acting on her own biases, sure, but there are larger forces involved here. When you see something like that happen, when a store treats someone like you the way they did, it's not just about that one moment. It's about the culture that allows it. The culture that hides behind policies, corporate agendas, and old-fashioned ideas of who belongs and who doesn't." Maya's heart sank as the weight of her dad's words settled in. She had always known that the world wasn't fair, but seeing it in action, especially in a space where she should have felt safe, felt different. It was hard to put into words, but the sting of it was deep. It wasn't just about being wronged, it was about the silence that allowed it to happen again and again. It was about a system that turned a blind eye to those who were marginalized. Do you think we can actually change it?" Maya asked, looking up at her dad. Her dad met her gaze, and for the first time, Maya saw something flicker in his eyes. It was hope, but it was also fear. He had been in this world long enough to know that change wasn't easy. It was messy, painful, and often resisted by those who had the most to lose. "I think we can," he said slowly. "But it won't be easy. There are a lot of people who are comfortable with the way things are. And they're going to push back. But we can make a difference, right?" Maya asked, her voice more determined now. Her dad smiled softly. "I believe we can. But it's going to take time. And it's going to take a lot of hard work." Maya nodded, feeling the resolve settle in her chest. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew that the fight wasn't over. She wasn't going to let moments like this slide into the background, not when she had a voice that could speak up. Maybe she hadn't asked for this confrontation, but now that it had come to light, she couldn't look away from it. The truth had been laid bare in front of her, and now, it was up to her to figure out what to do with it. Later that evening, Maya found herself reflecting on everything that had unfolded. Her dad's words, Andrew's surprise intervention, the woman who had spoken out in the store, it all felt like a whirlwind of emotion, injustice, and awakening. But as she sat on the couch, thinking about it, she realized something important: this wasn't just about one store, or one person. This was a systemic issue. One person speaking up could start a conversation, but it would take many voices, working together, to create real change. In the days that followed, her dad began making calls, consulting with lawyers and other business leaders. He was determined to make sure that the incident at the store wasn't just forgotten or swept under the rug. But it wasn't just about him. Maya realized that she had a role to play in this, too. She didn't have to be a passive observer. She could actively push for change, in whatever way that meant for her. She could speak up when things weren't right, even when it was hard. even when it made people uncomfortable. As her dad worked on his plan, Maya began looking into ways to get involved. She reached out to local organizations that focused on racial equality, volunteer opportunities that would allow her to stand up for others who were facing the same challenges she had. She started following activists, reading books, and trying to educate herself more about the structures that perpetuated discrimination. Maya knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to do her part. The store incident didn't fade away. Instead, it became a catalyst for something bigger. The people involved, Veronica, Emma, and even the store manager, found themselves under scrutiny. The company that owned the store was forced to issue an apology and review its policies. And while that didn't erase the harm that had been done, it was a step forward. It was evidence that voices like hers, voices like the woman who had spoken out, could be heard. Months later, Maya found herself sitting in a meeting with a group of local activists, discussing strategies for community outreach and change. Her dad was there, too, listening and supporting. And for the first time in a long while, Maya felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. She wasn't just the girl who had been wronged in a store, she was an active participant in pushing for a better future, for a world where people like her didn't have to fight so hard to be seen and heard. As the meeting came to a close, Maya's dad put his hand on her shoulder. "You've come a long way," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you." Maya smiled, feeling the weight of his words. It hadn't been easy, but she had learned something that day in the store. The fight for change wasn't always about winning a single battle, it was about standing up, even when the odds felt insurmountable. And when you did that, you inspired others to do the same. The world wasn't perfect. It never would be. But Maya knew now that she had the power to challenge it. To make her voice heard, and to help others find the courage to do the same. And in that moment, she realized that was all she needed to make a difference.